case is different, and with this case, there's varying degrees of culpability among the various defendants. And you know, to be frank, there is a sympathetic factor for Ms. Stewart. You know, it's hard on some fronts not to feel some sympathy for her. Stephen Decatur did deceive his family, deceived his wife, his kids. You know, he convinced them that he had terminal cancer. He convinced them that he was employed by Homeland Security. And although we're waiting on the final autopsy report still, the preliminary investigation into his death is that he took his own life to avoid the consequences of his criminal acts. And now, you know, we're left with just the remaining defendants, including his daughter. You know, and I do understand the defendant has, you know, 5 children, and some of them are young, and certainly there's some sympathy there, and the state does acknowledge no prior criminal convictions. And I understand, you know, this argument. Both Ms. Stewart and the Texas defendant have made this argument that, you know, they were conned and that they did work for the county and that the county received a benefit for that work. The state does not agree with that argument, and that's, as the court knows, that's been a very big point of contention between counsel. But even putting that aside, it's against the law to use your position to funnel money to yourself and to a family member. And that's exactly what happened here. Even if all the work was done, even if the county did receive a benefit, which again, that's a point of contention in this case, I understand, but you have a situation where, you know, Stephen Decatur used his position to put about $1 million in his pocket and about $400,000 and some into his daughter's pocket. Yes, it's over a period of time, and yes, on a per year basis, she was certainly not getting rich off of this. But you can't do that, and you can't be involved in a scheme to funnel county money into your own pocket and into your daughter's pocket, and certainly Ms. Stewart aided and abetted those efforts. If the defendant didn't think she was doing anything proper, you know, why did she use the alias Elaine? Why didn't she have her own login credentials? You know, Stephen Decatur's first jail phone call after he was arrested was to his wife, telling his wife to tell Ms. Stewart, tell her not to log in. There's 161 separate bank transactions, and as the court's aware, in these transactions, the money's being wired in, and the defendant's going to the bank oftentimes the same day and taking out cash withdrawals and cashier's checks directly to her father and her father's company. And again, that's where, you know, there's some issues. And then again, you know, because of the discussions, I won't get into it, but you know, there's a lot of text messages in this case, and there's certainly text messages that the state would characterize as incriminating, as understanding that Ms. Stewart knew that, you know, what she was doing was not right, and that if her real identity was known to the county, that would be a problem. And it was a problem once her identity was determined.
I understand the sequence of events. It was over a 9 or 10 year period that these 161 wire transfers were conducted. I mean, it wasn't in a year or two.
No, it was over a fairly significant period of time.
So I know the state feels strongly that we could prove Ms. Stewart's criminal intent. And I know from talking to both of you in chambers that Attorney Corral is going to make the argument that there was nothing extraordinary about these transactions that would have alerted her client to the fact that there might be some illegality going on. Now, without getting into the specifics, because I know the state has emails and text messages that would, you know, argue otherwise. But I'm just saying that I want the record to be clear that this scheme that Ms. Stewart became part of, whether wittingly or unwittingly, happened over a period of 9 or 10 years.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say approximately 9 years.
Okay.
This one.
All right. And I understand from the pre-sentence report, and counsel alluded to it, that that some work was done on behalf of the county. It's not clear to the court how much. We don't know how to break it down. And that, she wasn't taking exotic vacations or driving an expensive car. In fact, I think the pre-sentence report said her car is about 15 years old. She's living in a modest home with a mortgage. And I just mention those things because this wasn't a get-rich scheme. Now, I know from our discussions over the months that everybody agrees that Mr. Decatur was the principal organizer of this fraudulent scheme, that he brought his daughter into it, and we could argue all day about what she knew and what she didn't know. The fact of the matter was, when you describe Mr. Decatur as a con man, I mean, not only, he conned the former treasurer, correct? Or auditor.
Yes.
There's a board that oversees these contracts, correct? They all were misled. And I bring those matters up because, if he conned them, how are we confident he didn't con his daughter? And just one more thing, I'm not in any way criticizing the prosecutor. You've done a very thorough professional job, and I have no problem with anything you've done in this case, but there are multiple defendants. The two individuals from Texas both said they felt they were conned by Mr. Decatur. One of the defendants, Mr. Kelly, his case was dismissed outright, correct?
That's correct.
And there's still a case pending against Mr. Kraus.
Yes.
There was some indication, and these weren't my cases, but there was some indication that no jail time would be imposed against Mr. Kraus.
Mr. Decatur's, again, that again, as the court stated, that was the focus of the prosecution. He was the primary defendant in this. He gained, as to the $400,000 figures that have been thrown around for the Texas company and for Ms. Stewart, Mr. Decatur's cut of this over that 9-year period of time was about $1 million.
Mr. Decatur.
Yes, that was what he received from the scheme to defraud.
And I know that had he lived and had he been convicted, the state was going to seek a lengthy prison term, and which would have been justified. I think the court would have taken a very dim view of his criminal conduct. So.
Indeed, the entire time she participated in this, Ms. Stewart fairly and honestly believed that she was earning her living performing work for the county. And I think when we look at the evidence supports that conclusion. Sure, he cites 161 transactions. Those transactions were made in broad daylight in banks with cameras. They used her father's name, her name. There's no evidence that she was trying to hide this. Indeed, a lot of this money was declared on her taxes. I believe all of it was, I just don't have all of her tax returns. But she continued to participate in this for a period of 10 years. Not because she thought she was getting away with something illegal. She thought she was earning a modest income doing work her father had trained her to do. And the most damaging part of the discovery is that a portion of what she earned was paid to her father. And she, based on her father's representation, believed that her father had spoken to the county to approve this, that he was helping her with her contracts and work that she was still learning how to do. And so,
What about the fact that she used a pseudonym?
the pseudonym is her middle name. So her father is Stephen Decatur. Her name at the time was Stephanie Decatur. She just wanted to differentiate herself from her father and making her own personal and professional reputation. She used her middle name. She didn't make up an alias out of thin air. She just used her middle name. Ms. Stewart never misrepresented to the county. The company in Texas, IderSource, in the majority of transactions, they presented invoices to the county and then subcontracted Ms. Stewart to do the work. It is Source who presented the invoices to the county in the majority of transactions, and Source who accepted the payment from the county in the majority of transactions. Source then kept a cut and paid Ms. Stewart for her subcontract work. Everyone involved in this believed that what they were doing was legitimate. Further still, in the course of my investigation on the case, interview of the current IT staff who worked with Mr. Decatur noted that they were devastated by his misrepresentation. They never thought he would do something like this. One of the people who still works here said they thought of him like a father and referred to him as an IT god. When someone who has a reputation within a professional community is taking you under their wing, showing you how to do the business, and helping you get contracts and that someone is a person you've trusted your whole life, it's not beyond reason that Ms. Stewart would have believed what she was doing was lawful. And you know, another aspect of this is proportionality. The auditor who approved every one of these invoices and approved every one of these payments got a $1,200, $1,250 fine, no probation, and the right to run for office again in 4 years. The case against Mr. Kelly out of Texas was dismissed. The case against Mr. Cruz, he was offered a plea with no time whatsoever. And it's worth noting that in saying this crime is not likely to reoccur, not only has Mr. Decatur passed away, but all of the fail-safes in this case within the county failed. I mean, some of the evidence we received was that members of the ADP board received notice of this in 2010. And it continued for 10 more years, further indicating that Ms. Stewart's belief that what she was doing was lawful was reasonable.
Well, say that again, explain that point.
A public records request showed that a member of the commissioner's office, on at least 23 occasions, indicated to at least one member of the ADP board that there was issue with these invoices.
One of the county commissioners.
Yeah, and by statute, the ADP board is supposed to approve all expenditures on IT goods or services. And so, my understanding, it was under a different prosecutor, but my understanding is Frank Lehow was indicted on 5 misdemeanors for being derelict in his duty to present this to the board. But I think there's at least a reasonable suggestion that the board was aware of it and didn't find concern. You know, one of the considerations for sentencing is proportionality, and you can't look to anything closer than the other defendants in this same case. Approximately $400,000 is attributable to Ms. Stewart. That same amount is attributable to Mr. Cruz. The only difference being that Mr. Cruz isn't alleged to have done any work, except subcontract Ms. Stewart.
I love my dad. At one point, he was my best friend. He let me move back home when I messed up, and he taught me how to do things on the computer that we call the Matrix in the movies. I went to school for the same thing. I started off in psychology and then changed my mind because I was boring and did the technology stuff. And I literally would stand over his shoulder for hours, just old school writing every single thing down.
Me programming?
Yeah, coding. So all the stuff you can't see, I configured this contraption here in the background. I took care of the Cisco Prime licensing, your phone system. Anytime there was a mistake on the phone, you pick up the phone and the dial tone isn't there right away. I was the one that would take care of a lot of the back end stuff. I did work from home a majority of my career, and that was actually kind of the beauty of it. I worked from home before there was this flexjobs.com. I was able to use technology like VPN and go from Akron into Chardon. My mistake was, looking back, I trusted my dad to not lead me astray. I really did believe that he would not do that to me. It took his death before I realized that, in a fight with my sister, before I realized that, you know what, my dad was wrong. And I have to accept responsibility for the part that I have done. And my part was a decision. I could have decided, no, I'm not gonna work with you. But I decided to work with him because I really believe that what he said was, I remember having this conversation many times before, that, oh, I talked to my lawyer and everything's okay, this is a way to do this, that's legal, all, you know, just send in your end of day, send in your quotes, send in your invoices. And I didn't Google it, I just believed them. I didn't look into it. All my life I have researched and read and studied, and I really just didn't question him. I thought it was okay. I believed for years I was doing the work. I got up early. I would stay up late with Windstream, talking to dispatchers when they couldn't make phone calls or receive calls. Like, I really believed I was doing it. And I'm not a bad person. Excuse me. I'm not a bad person. I just wouldn't have ever done that to my kids. I would not have put them in a position that would better myself over their own self-worth. And I would not have left them to deal with some stuff that I started if I was my father, which I'm not. And I'm hoping that that is taken into consideration, because I'm not him. Original plan, I was gonna do this full time, and he was gonna retire, and I was gonna take on IT world, you know, by storm, and I just don't even have the passion to do it anymore. But I did have plans to do so, but my plans were not to present myself in a false manner. I worked with the school systems. We did many school systems in the area. I worked through SMCS, through ISIS. So, you know, I would get paid from ISIS when I did ISIS work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else to say, because now that I know, when I know the rules, I'm not ignorant. When I do know, I can make better decisions. I just put too much trust into one person.
I think we can all agree that Mr. Decatur was the one who organized the scheme. It's obvious that he conned people from the auditor to this board that oversees the contracts. We can all agree that we had hoped that Mr. Decatur would have come forward, taken responsibility for this. He was the principal beneficiary of this scheme, of the fraud, and I can see where Ms. Stewart, and I know the state disagrees with this, but I can see where Ms. Stewart might have believed that what she was doing was legitimate, and she was doing work for which she was being paid for. Again, I know the state has a different view, but again, to go to trial on this case would have been nothing short of a nightmare, I think.